When it comes to building a gaming PC, it can be really tricky to know how much to spend. And I get people ask me all the time whether you can really notice the difference between a $1,500 system and one that costs, say, $2,000 or even $3,000. That's why today I'll be building 3 systems around 3 budgets to see whether spending more is really that noticeable and whether I can tell how expensive and how powerful each system is. Let's do this. The premise of this video is quite simple. I'm going to build 3 systems around 3 different budgets: $1,500, $2,000, and $3,000. Each aims to be fairly representative of what you buy at that price point. Starting off with the $1,500 system, and I've based this off a recent build, but swapped the GPU out for an RTX 4070 Super. This is one of the most popular mid-range cards right now. It's also got an Intel Core i5-14400F, 32GB of DDR4 memory, and is built in Corsair's fairly entry-level but still decent 3000D. My mid-range system, coming in at $2,000, looks a piece nicer inside of Fractal Design's North case, a hugely popular chassis, but this time features an AMD Ryzen 7700 and an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4070 Ti Super, working up that GPU range by 1 notch. The final system is built inside of Corsair's stunning 6500X and features the RTX 4080 Super, arguably the most powerful GPU right now, with the exception, of course, of the RTX 4090. Massive shout out, by the way, to GeekaWhat for sending all the cards out for these builds and making this video possible. All of these systems are pretty primed for 1440p gaming, which is where I'll be testing. Now, before I jump into the games on these systems, they are now built, so let's take a look at them and analyze the visual differences between these 3 price points first of all. The first system is this, the Corsair 3000D based $1,500 build. You can see it's fairly basic. We've got a simple deep cool cooler. We've even got cheaper things like a more entry-level power supply that doesn't have the Gen 5 cable. The graphics card still looks really nice. This is the Aero design, really like that, with 32GB of DDR4 memory. That older DRAM definitely not quite as good for the future, and an area we obviously want to improve as we spend that bit more money. Talking of spending a bit more money, let's take a look at this. Now, this is the $2,000 system I talked about. Massive graphics card. Like, look at the size of this thing. It's ridiculous. I obviously decided with this build that I was just going to go big on everything. Massive air cooler, deep cool assassin. Instantly, one thing I noticed, this is so much quieter than the $1,500 build. It looks nicer, the fans are better quality, and of course we have a higher end motherboard. This one's got a B650 Gaming X AX with, of course, some overclocking headroom. We haven't got that on the other board, and of course DDR5 memory, which is going to be quicker and give us a bit more performance. Storage in this is also faster, so general boot time is going to be better, and you can see how that general user experience is getting better as we got the lineup. Now, $3,000, what do you get? This is a lot of money to spend on a system, and my word, doesn't it look good. Corsair 6500 case matched perfectly to our 4080 Super GPU. VRAM amounts, of course, grown up the lineup. This has got 16 gigs alongside the $2,000 build. The more entry-level system only has 12. You can also see we've got budget here for nicer things like a Corsair IQ Link cooler that looks amazing. And of course, unlike our other system, a perfectly sized PCIe Gen 5 power cable. So evidently then, as you spend a bit more, you can definitely achieve a nicer looking build, but it's frame rate that we really care about. So I'm going to get editor Dan to plug in all these systems at random, so I do not know which one I'm playing at, to see if I can actually tell the difference between each of these 3 builds. This could be quite embarrassing if I get this wrong, but I'm actually really interested to see if you can tell and reliably guess which one's which. The first system's plugged in. Let's call this system 1. I've got no idea which system it is. Jumping into Horizon Forbidden West, and we're running at 1440p, very high settings, everything tuned right up, DLSS and frame generation on. I'm going to disable DLSS as well shortly so we can see what impact that has, and you can of course check out the frame rate up in the top right hand corner. So we're at around about 194 FPS on average so far. The frame rate genuinely feels buttery smooth, and I feel like at 1440p I'm getting a really great gaming experience. As I jump down into the water, wow, look at that, looks really, really fantastic. Also going to jump into those settings menus and disable frame generation and NVIDIA DLSS so we can get a rasterization number, and let's see what impact that has on the frame rate. Okay, that's right down to sub 100 FPS now, so we are seeing quite a sizable difference, but still 90 FPS for what is an RPG game is more than adequate. All in all though, it looks good, and I'm intrigued as to which system this is. Next up is CSGO 2. I want to try an FPS driven title before moving moving on to the next system. So in video, we're running at 1440p full screen, and we've of course gone for the very high preset overall. And I'm going to enable the FPS counter so we can always see what kind of results that we are getting. So let's jump into a local deathmatch game so we can see what kind of frame rates are achievable. Graphically looking very good. I always forget how much better CS2 looks than the original CSGO. Around about 330 FPS out the doors. Beautiful. So a little bit of a drop there down to just below 300 FPS, but still not too bad. With all of our frame rate numbers staying really quite consistent throughout. Time for system number 2. System number 2, frame rate is sitting around the 126, 127 mark. Same settings, 1440p high, DLSS and frame gen on, and I'll turn DLSS and frame gen off in a moment. Noticeably less frame rate than on the last system. That makes me believe this could be our lower end 4070 super build. Even still though, we're well in excess of that 60 FPS mark. We're even in those triple digit frame rates, and the game again looks really quite nice. All of our textures, reflections, again looking pretty good. That DLSS is just giving us all the upside, especially at that quality preset. Now let's just turn that DLSS off. I know some of you prefer to play with it on, some of you prefer to play with it off. Let's take the frame gen off first and then turn the upscale method to off as well and hit apply. So turning those off, our frame rate is unsurprisingly now a lot lower than it was. We're down to 86 FPS on average, a bit of a drop there on the graph, down to 74, 75. That seems to be the more realistic level, I think, here. Graphically still looks good. We're still in excess of that 60 FPS mark, but you can see here where we're arguably a lot more reliant upon the likes of DLSS to actually get the kind of frame rates we'd want. So I'm going to guess early that this is going to be that cheaper $1,500 4070 system, but it's still not a bad gaming experience, and I could be wrong. Moving through then into CSGO 2, our FPS title again, 1440p advanced video settings. We're going to set these again to very high, which is the same. All of those changes have been saved. Let's see where we get to. Our frame rate now is sitting at 200, 189, so less again. But if you don't look at that frame rate, we're still getting a really smooth experience. And this monitor only being 240 hertz means that we can't actually really take advantage too much of any frame rate over and beyond that 240 mark. Of course, it helps because your frames are not always naturally going to be synced to the refresh rate and the frame refresh of your monitor, but I wouldn't say this feels particularly any less competitive than last time around. I think I'm going to hold off on my assumption that this could be the lower end 4070 system. Frame rate down to 220, but I guess the final system is going to really be the major moment of truth. Moving through to system number 3, and straight off the bat, we're looking pretty strong. Nearly 200 FPS, down to 170, 180. This to me feels like it could be the 4070 Ti super base system. The system we looked at last definitely felt like it had a bit of a performance lag compared to system number 1, but this, I have to say, feels pretty good. Now again, this is with DLSS and frame generation enabled. It looks great. Just for fairness sake, let's go into those display settings and then go down to DLSS, turn frame gen off and turn DLSS off as well, and then hit apply. Now that is obviously going to dent the frame rate down to 102, 104 FPS. Still though, looks pretty great in my opinion. And you can see from that FPS graph that the frame rate's fairly consistent. We're not dropping far below 108, 107 FPS with a max peak of about 120, give or take. So into CS2 for the final time, 1440p, let's go into full screen mode just so everything's exactly the same. And then in the advanced video settings, we're going to go onto that very high preset. Wait for it to do its thing. Beautiful. Play, practice, deathmatch. The same nuke map. Here we go. Just for memory's sake, the first system was about 300 FPS. The last was about 200-ish, 250. Now we're at 308, 292. So yeah, again, this backs up my theory using the frame rate that I think this is going to be that 4070 Ti based system. But I have to say, it surprised me between, if I am right, the 4070 Ti Super and 4080 Super, how little discernible difference there actually is when it comes to day-to-day gameplay, especially now that Nvidia have bulked up the VRAM amount to 16 gigabytes on that 4070 Ti Super. This title does of course support Nvidia Reflex as well, which is great for busting some of those reaction times and allowing you again to just push that performance that bit further and give you that better competitive edge. And as much as GeekaWhat and Nvidia sent the cards out for this video, I do think that's a genuine, honest advantage that you get when it comes to Nvidia GPUs. That software ecosystem surrounding the cards now is just so solid, whether it be DLSS, ray tracing, frame generation, NVIDIA reflex. There's lots and lots of features that some people will feel like they do not want to go without when they're shopping and, of course, deciding what their next graphics card should be. For some reason, I seem to be in this game on my own. Where is everybody? Oh, they're all here. What are they all doing in here? You can see why a bot game's not ideal, but I just needed a scenario that was going to have identical test conditions just to make this thing absolutely as fair as possible. So I'm going to look at my guesses. I think the first system was maybe the top end $3,000 4080 build. The second was our definitely low end 4070 Super $1,500 build. And this was the $2,000 to $2,500 4070 Ti Super build. Editor Dan, am I right?
Close.
I'm not right.
Not right.
I've got it wrong. System 1 is the 4070 Ti Super. System 2 is the 4070 Super. And this was the 48. Wow. Okay. I mean, that just shows how, especially at 1440p, remember that 4080 Super is going to give you a more discernible advantage at 4K. The difference can look really close. Now, there is one more thing I want to do, and that is to compare the cheapest versus the most expensive system side by side. Now, for this, I'm going to use Cyberpunk because we can crank ray tracing up, DLSS on, and I get a great excuse to use this unbelievable 5K super ultra wide Aorus monitor. So these are two 1440p feeds showing at 2560 by 1440 simultaneously. Unbelievable. Right, I'm going to run the benchmark first. Here are the settings that I'm using with the two mice. DLSS is on quality. We've got frame generation off. Ray trace lighting, let's pop that up to let's go ultra preset. I think that's probably around about where we'd be running normally. And there's a quick swizz on all the rest of the settings. And then just hit apply. All that then remains is to hit B on the keyboard. And we are, of course, going to run the benchmark mode. So here we go, run the two benchmarks. Hopefully they're fairly in sync. And you can see the frame rate in the top right of one and top left of another. Here we go. So they're slightly out of sync, but it's good enough for me. You can see there's about a 30-40 FPS upside on our system on the right. Obviously, all those ray traced light reflections look really good in Cyberpunk. You can see here's a prime example. The right feed definitely feels a bit more fluid. I'm definitely seeing the advantage of that extra 40 FPS. We're seeing a 25-30% uplift. But I have to say, both look really good. What do you think? I'll leave links to all the parts mentioned today. This unbelievable 49-inch super ultra wide down in the description below. Which system do you think you would buy on the basis of performance and pricing? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Get subscribed to see more from us. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.